We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Aleph Amud Beis Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 61b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara had a machlokus between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Let's say a person says that everyone should worship me. He wants to make himself like an idol, himself like a god. And so then those who follow, those who say they're going to follow, there's a machlokus between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says chayiv and Rabbi Yehuda says pater. And the Gemara in the previous Amud explained that the difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is, the question is whether or not they really intend on following him. Rabbi Meir says that really is their intention, but Rabbi Yehuda says that everybody really is saying to themselves, Ma'ishna ihu minan didon, what's the difference between him and us? There's no reason that they actually think that he is a god. Ve'inda ka'amrin, when they say yes, they're just simply laughing at him. We don't take that seriously, and that's the real reason why Rabbi Yehuda says pater. Rashi says, Ma'ishna ihu liyosa lo yosri many, why should he be a god more than me? Ve'inda ka'amr le'achuchi aleh, when they're saying yes, they really just mean to say it like a joke, and that's the machlokas again between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara continues, Umasnisan. Now, what about the contradiction within our Mishnayos? Rashi says, Umasnisan dekashin hadadi hachi. We asked on the previous Amud as follows: Mesukma reisha dekatani oved in omer lo. Because again, in the beginning, the Mishnah says that the person has to actually worship the avodah zarah in order to be liable. But then the later Mishnah implies that even if the person simply says that they're going to worship the avodah zarah, accepts the avodah zarah upon himself, that's enough to be chayiv. And now we will have a number of answers to that question. And here's the first answer: Umasnisan kan bi yochid hanisas. In one case, we're talking where there's an individual who's convinced to worship avodah zarah. Kan berabim hanisasim. And in the other Mishnah, we're talking where it is a multitude. It's a number of people that are convinced. What's the difference? Because yochid lo mimlach v'toy basrei. When a yochid commits, he's not going to change his mind. He really is making that mistake and following the avodah zarah. Just the statement alone is enough to make him liable. But rabim mimlachi. But the rabim, when you're talking about a bunch of people, they're going to consider the matter further. V'lo basrei. They're not necessarily going to make that mistake and follow the avodah zarah. So it only goes by the actual worshiping. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Mina amin Allah, from where can I show that this is the answer to the question, that we make a distinction between a yachid and a rabbim? Because it's written in the pasuk, lo so velo sishma elav. It says again, the person is not going to accept the words of the Meseches. Ha'ava v'shama chayiv. So it sounds like if the person does in fact accept what the Meseches is saying, and he accepts to worship the avodah zarah, that's enough to be chayiv. But the Gemara continues, Eisvei Abaya. Abaya asks to Rav Yosef, Mishani bein nisas derabim lenisas yachid. Is it really true that there's a difference between a bunch of people who are convinced and decided to worship avodah zarah and an individual? But we learned in a brayso, it says again that you're going to be incited to worship avodah zarah. It doesn't matter if we're talking about an individual who's convinced. It doesn't matter if it's a bunch of people who are convinced. But the pasuk specifies an individual as opposed to a public, and the public as opposed to an individual. We talk about both of them, and the idea is as follows: Yachid michlal rabim. The reason why we mention the yachid, like it says in singular, vayelech vayavod. So why does it say that? Lahachmir al gufu lahakel al mamona. Because by the individual, so we're actually stricter when it comes to his body, because the punishment is skila, it's stoning. But we're lenient when it comes to his money. We don't destroy his money like we do by the members of a city by Yenir Nidachas. And rabim michlal yachid. But we also talk about a rabim, how that's different than an individual. Lahakel al gufu, because we're more lenient on their bodies, because there the punishment is going to be sayif. The punishment is going to be beheading by the sword, which is considered more lenient. Or lahachmir al mamonim. But then we're stricter when it comes to their money, because we burn all of their property. And so the Gemara now says, Baham milsahu deshani. So Abaya says, it's only in this regard that there's a difference between an individual and the public. Aval b'chol mili, but in all other matters, ki hadadininu, it sounds like they're all the same. And so therefore what Rav Yosef is saying to make this distinction between a yachid and a rabbim does not seem to be correct. And so the Gemara continues, Elamar Abaya, rather Abaya says the difference between the two Mishnayos is kan benisas mipi atzmo, kan benisas mipi acherim. In one case, we're talking where the person convinces himself, nobody's convincing him to worship the avodah zarah. In the other case, we're talking where others convince him, and the difference is as follows: mipi atzmo mimlach. When a person is convinced on his own, he actually might change his mind, and so therefore the statement alone is not going to be mechayev him. Mipi acherim gar basrai. But if others are convincing him, he's already dragged after them, and therefore just the statement alone alone, we see that he's accepting this person, or he's accepting this item as an idol, as an avodah zarah, and so therefore that alone is enough. The statement alone is enough to make him liable. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaye says, Mena Aminallah, from where can I show that this is true, that we make this distinction, Dechsiv lo sovelo, velo sishmaelav. Again, it's talking about accepting lo sovelo, accepting the words of the person inciting. Ha'ava v'shamachayev, again, if he's accepting from somebody else, and then he worships the avodah zarah, that is enough to make him chayev. That's the distinction between the two mishnayos. Rava Amar Rava says a different answer. Idi v'idi b'nissus mipi acherim. Both mishnayos are talking when others are inciting. But Hada Amar le kach ocheles, kach shosa, kach metiva, kach maria. In one case, the person describing the avodah zarah is giving details. This is what it eats. This is what it drinks. This is the good it does. This is the bad. Hada lo Amar le kach ocheles, kach shosa. But in the other case, you're not providing any details. If details are provided, so then already the statement of worship alone is enough. But if there's no details provided, then there has to be an actual avodah, an actual worship of the avodah zarah to be liable. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Rava says, Meno Aminallah, from where can I show that this is true? Techsiv, because it's written in the pasuk, Me Elohei ho'amim asher svivo seichem hakrovim eilecha. It says you shouldn't go after the idols of the nations that are near to you, that are far away. Mali krovim or mali rechokim. Now, what's the difference if they're close or far? Hachi karmele. So here's what's being said: Mitivuzan shall krovim, from the status of the ones close. You know that the close idols are nothing. You're familiar with those, and they're nothing. Atalamid mativuzan shall rechokim. You can learn what's the benefit of the ones that are far away. They also are worthless. And so, what do we see from this pasuk? My love, is it not? The Amarle, that the person is saying to him, Kach ocheles, kach shosa, this is what it eats, this is what it drinks, Kach metiva, Kach maria, this is what's good, this is what's bad, and the details seem to be provided over here. And so the Gemara says, Shema Mina. Again, you see from this that in that particular case, the person accepts it. That alone makes him liable. But otherwise, if he's just given generalities and he accepts it, that is not enough. And the Gemara continues. Rav Ashi says, Seifa b'Yisrael mumar. When we're talking in that end Mishnah, where we say the acceptance alone is enough, that's by a Jew who's already apostate. He's already somebody who's rebelled against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There, just simply saying he's going to worship avodah zarah, that we assume to be a real commitment, and therefore we say he's liable in that case. And Ravina says another answer, Lo zu afzu katani. Actually, the way to read the Mishnah is Lo zu afzu. It means not only this, even this, not only when you worship are you liable, but even when you simply accept it upon yourself, you're liable. And that's the answer to the contradiction within the Mishnayos. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was stated, Ha'oved avodas kochavim me'avo u'me'yira. What if a person worships avodah zarah from love and fear? That means from love and fear of a person. He doesn't think that this is really a god, but somebody is causing him to worship the avodah zarah because they're saying if you don't do it, there's some kind of threat or something along those lines. So is that chayiv or potter? Abaye Amar chayiv. Abaye says chayiv in that case. Rava Amar potter. Rava says the person is not liable in that case. Abaye Amar chayiv da polcha. Abaye says he's chayiv because he indeed worshipped it. Rava Amar potter. Rava said he's potter. Why? In only if he accepts this as a god, then yes, he's liable. But if he doesn't accept it as a god, then he is not liable. And the Gemara continues at the two dots with a mnemonic for the following Gemara, Siman Eved Yishtachav El Mashiach. And the Gemara says, V'yamar Abaye. Abaye says, again, this is the same Abaye that just said, if a person worships avodah zarah, me'ava u'me'yira is chayiv. So Abaye says, Mena Aminallah, from where can I show that this is true, that serving me'ava u'me'yira is chayiv? Tetanan, because we learned in the Mishnah, Ha'oved avodas kochavim echad ha'oved. It says, if somebody worships avodah zarah, whether one worships, what does that line mean? My love, doesn't it mean echad ha'oved me'ava u'me'yira? Even if somebody just worships from love or from fear of a person, that is enough to make a person liable, and therefore that's a proof from that Mishnah. But Rav will say to you, Lo, no, that's not what the Mishnah means. Rather, it's Rabbi Yirmiyah. It's just like Rabbi Yirmiyah. We said earlier how Rabbi Yirmiyah explained the Mishnah, as Rashi explains, Rabbi Yirmiyah echad ovid kol avoda shi dark. It means like this: whether you worship the idol in the normal fashion that it's worshipped, bekach, with that particular way that idol is worshipped, or let's say you sacrifice, you do some avoda of the Beis HaMikdash towards that idol, even if it's not the normal way that idol is worshipped. But again, in both the Reisha and the Sefer, it always means that you're worshiping for the sake of this idol as a god. That's how Rava will understand the Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Mena Aminallah, again, from where can I prove that you're chayiv when you're oved me'avo me'yira? Titania, because we learn in a brayso, lo sishtachav lohem. It says you shouldn't bow to them. Lohem yatam ishtachav. We learn from there that you can't bow to these idols. Aval atam ishtachav lo adam kemoscha. But you're allowed to bow to a person like you, meaning to say, if you're bowing to the person not as a god. Yachol afilo nevad kahama. Now, I might think that even if the person is trying to be served like Haman made himself like a god, you're allowed to bow in that case. Talmud Talmud, Lomer v'lo sa'avdim. That's what the pasuk says, v'lo sa'avdim, you can't worship them. So in other words, you're allowed to bow out of respect to a person, but you're not allowed to do it if the person is considering himself to be like a god. And so the Gemara now says, v'ha Haman, but with regards to Haman, which is the example being given in this brisa, miyira havenevad. So he was being worshipped out of fear. Nobody actually thought he was a god. He said that he was a god, and people were afraid of him, and yet it seems to be that you're liable in that case. So that's a proof to Abaya. The Gemara says, v'rava, but Rava responds, that's not what the brisa means. Kehaman v'lo kahaman. We're giving the example like Haman, but it's not exactly like Haman. Kehaman diyu gufei avodas kochavim, like Haman, because he made himself like a god. V'lo kahaman, but not exactly like Haman. Di'ilu Haman miyira, because by Haman they were bowing out of fear, and that would not have made them liable. V'hacha lav miyira. But here we're talking when somebody is doing it not out of fear. And the Gemara continues, V'yamar Abai, and Abai says, Mina aminullah, again, from where can I prove that if it's miyira or miyava, the person is liable? The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Kohen Mashiach, when it comes to the anointed Kohen, when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, be'avodas kochavim, when it comes to the Kohen Gadol who does avodah zara. Rashi says, Kohen Mashuach bekarban avodas kochavim. He's bringing a karban because of his worship of avodah zara. Rebbe Omer b'shigagas ma'isa. Rebbe says we're talking about shigagas ma'isa. There's a mistake in his action. The Chachamim Omer b'helam davar, and the Chachamim say that there was something that was hidden from him. That's the situation of shogeg, where he brings this karban. Rashi explains, Rebbe Omer b'shigagas ma'isa afilu lo nela mimenu isra avodas kochavim. What Rebbe is saying is, even if he knew about the isser of worshiping avodah zara, that was not hidden from him. Ela sheshagag b'ma'isa, but he made some mistake in the action he was doing. Chayiv, he's going to be chayiv to bring that carbon. Even though by other times you bring karbanos by other mitzvahs, there it has to be that you didn't know the halacha. It's written by the chatos that's brought by the community. V'nelam davar. It says that phrase v'nelam davar kagon horu bezin shechelav mutter. For example, let's say the court they ruled that chelav is mutter when it's not. V'yasal yedei halamasan, and people did that, they didn't realize. And we know that the Kohen Mashiach is like the community, but afilu hachi, nevertheless, ba'avodas kochavim shekaravnu shava l'shar yechidim, shekarbanu shava l'shar yechidim, by avodah zara where his karban, shekarbanu shava, his karban is the same as the karban by other individuals. Kedektani v'yazal is what we taught. Machaya b'shigagas ma'isa below helam davar. There, even if it was a mistake in his action, it is enough to bring that karban. That's what Rebbe says. So the Gemara is about to explain what is this mistaken action that we're talking about. The Chacham say, no, Afkan, it has to be Helam Davar. It has to be some mistake in terms of his understanding of halacha. That's the machlokas between Rebbe and the Chachamim. And the Brisa continues, V'shavin, now they both agree, Shebese'ira kiyachid, that he brings a se'ira, he brings a goat like an individual. V'shavin, and they also agree, She'ein mevi asham tali, that he doesn't bring the asham tali. The asham tali is when there's some kind of suffix, there's some kind of doubt involved. Rashi explains, V'shavin shebesira kiyachid v'afilu l'rabbanan, meaning even according to the rabbanan, it's a lo ma'ashri like a shar yachid. They don't consider him to be like other yachidim, like other individuals. Linyan leschai below helam davar, that he should be chayiv even if it's not helam davar. But modim hein shein karbano ba'avodas kochavim chalak mishar yachid. But they also admit that the carbon is the same by avodah zara by any other individual, as by any other individual. Shemevi se'ira, that he brings a se'ira. And also the Brisa said, V'shav, and they also agree, She'eno mevi asham tali, that he doesn't bring an asham tali, meaning al shum lo hoda shabetorah, in any time of in any situation, again, where it's not known. Mishum degave asham tali ksiv al shigagaso asher shagag, by Asham Tali, it says it's the mistake which he made a mistake. Ma'ashma misha mevi chatas al hoda, the shigas ma'isa mevi Asham Tali al lo hoda. The point is that it implies that if it's a person who brings a chatas in a situation of shigas ma'isa, only then, if you don't even know whether you did the aver or not, then you bring an Asham Tali. Yatsa mashuach she'in mevi chatas ela behelam davar, that excludes a kohen mashuach, that excludes the kohen gadol. He only brings the chatas by helam davar. V'yashmin and hacha, and what we're saying over here is afilu l'Rebbe, even according to Rebbe, who says that's not exactly true. There is a situation where the Kohen Gadol actually brings, with the Shigagas Maisa, brings the carbon, but Modahu She'ein Mevi Asham Tali, but still he admits there is no Asham Tali. And in any case, getting back to the proof of Abaya, the Gemara says, "Hay shigagas ma'isa da'avodas kochavim." When Rebbe says that by shigagas ma'isa that some mistake was made, and the Kohen Gadol brings this carbon, that shigagas ma'isa by avodah zara hechidami, what exactly is the mistake? Ikosaver beis haknesses. So if you're going to say that what Rebbe means is the person who's bowing, the Kohen Gadol who's bowing or worshiping, he thinks it's a shul, he thinks that it's really for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'shtachev alone, he bows to it, harei libo l'shamayim, but then his heart really is to heaven, so there would be nothing wrong. Ella, rather, the case must be Dechaza in Drata, that he sees a statue, it looks like a person, Vishtachav, and he bows to it, and he Kibla Loa Beloa. Now, if the case is that he's actually accepted this as a god, so Mezidhu, so then what he's doing is actually on purpose. And Rashi explains, Shigagas Maisa, below Helam Dover, Hechidami. Again, what's the Shigagas Maisa without a Helam Dover, without not realizing the halacha? It can't be that he thought it was a Beis HaKnesses, Harei Libo LaShamayim. Then he's thinking towards heaven. V'lo ishtachav ezel avodas kochavim, lo mezid v'lo shogeg. He's not a mezid or shogeg for avodah zarah at all. Elo LaShamayim, Sharei LaShamayim niskavin. He's actually thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's his whole kavon over here. V'afilu ha'yodeya shezeh habayis avodas kochavim hu. V'mishtachav b'socho LaShamayim. Even if he knew it was a place of avodah zarah, but he was bowing to Shamayim, he was bowing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ein kanonish, there still wouldn't be a punishment. Shareaf mishtachav lebeis haknesses lo lebayis mishtachav, because even when you're bowing to a beis haknesses, you're not bowing to the synagogue itself. Elulami sheshachin shmo, you're bowing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whose name rests there. And Rashi continues, Ela dechaza in derota v'sagile, rather he saw a statue and he bowed to it. Sharad demus shayirugin lasos b'demus hamelech, it was some kind of statue, looked like a king, let's say. Varoa some mishtachav lechavar hamelech, people see it, they bow to it to honor the king. So some people actually worship it. This person saw one in particular that was worshipped by others, but he didn't know that it was worshipped by others, and he bowed to it. Now, if he accepted it as a god, he did it because he wanted it to be like a god. Mezidu, that would be on purpose, so that cannot be the case. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Beis Amud Aleph.